Welcome to the Press Box.
Today, I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
0.9. Tie game at 72. Illinois to inbound to the corner. Brandon Paul looking to inbound. Gets it to Griffey. Layup. Oh!
Smith, court 20 to right, down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
Williams to tie it with a three. He does. And we are going to game 7.
Welcome to the premiere edition of the Press Box. I am Keith Gibson. I will be your host, and we thank you for joining us this evening here on the Press Box. With me today is Matthew Gokin. Matthew is a sports commentator and broadcaster for 1490 WDAN and Newhoff Media Sports. And Matthew, we've got a lot to talk about today, including, everything from the NBA to Major League Baseball. And, we'll start out with the biggest trade of them all. I'm a huge Cub fan, but let's talk about Jeff Samardzija and Jason Hamill going to the Oakland A's in a deal that brought the Cubs a lot of prospects back.
Well, first off, thank you for having me, Keith, here on the Press Box. But I think it's a great trade for the Oakland Athletics. Here's why. They pick up two of the Cubs' aces from their pitching staff. Now, the aces for the Oakland Athletics, the top 5 pitchers in their rotations are on the top 35 for earned run average. So you talk about a premier lineup for the Oakland Athletics. For the Cubs, like you mentioned, it brings in some prospects, but overall, I think the Cubs have enough shortstop prospects, and I think it's a better deal for the Oakland Athletics.
Well, in the short term, Matthew, I have to agree with you that it probably is a better fit now for the Athletics. I think Billy Beane is looking at winning now. They're leading the division. They've got two great pitchers. Samardzija picked up a win already for the Athletics the other night. And so you're looking at this and you're thinking, wow, the A's are going to contend now and could be the best team in baseball if they stay healthy. But you look at the Cubs' perspective, and as everybody knows and is probably listening, I'm a diehard Cub fan. I think this trade is a great trade on both sides, and in the long run, it will really help the Cubs. Now it gives them 3 of the top 10 prospects in all of baseball, and Addison Russell, who came over, was a big major piece of the deal. Then you look at Javier Baez. Then you look at Chris Bryant. You still got Jorge Soler. You got Alcantara. The Cubs are loaded, and Theo Epstein has done a fantastic job in rebuilding this farm system. Don't you agree?
I do agree with bringing in the prospects and all that, but Keith, the one thing that always wins in baseball is pitching. For the Cubs right now with Travis Wood and Jake Arrieta, I think that's just not enough for them. But in the long run, hopefully, now that they have some prospects, they can deal them out and bring in a couple good pitchers.
And I agree with you totally, Matthew, is the fact that I think they will bring in some pitchers either via free agency and spend a little money, or now they've got the plethora of prospects they can now dish out and trade to bring in that strong arms, that top of the rotation type of guy that really will command. And with the prospects they have, they could bring in a 1 and a 2 and really be a contender. And I think it's not too far off. I really think that's something that, people were saying, 17, 18, is Theo going to get leave after? No. After this trade, I think people, even Cub fans, even the most regular Cub fans, will now say, even baseball fans, in fact, will say, they're getting real close. They're getting really close to contend.
I still think it's a couple of years off. Of course, 12 and a half games out as of right now, the NL Central. But like you said, maybe give it a couple, 2, 3, 4 years, and the Cubs will be right back out the top, hopefully. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out.
They did call up Kyle Hendricks, their minor league pitcher of the year last year, which was he'll get a start against the Reds this week, which is very big for him. They called up, they're going to call up these younger guys, I think, later in this year. They're going to call up, possibly even Chris Bryant. We could see Javier Baez called up. We could see Jorge Soler. I don't think the Cubs are done trading, and I'll be surprised if they don't get some pitching in return before the trade deadline.
Well, not only that, Keith, I think they don't bring those guys up this year because they want them to stand out and be rookies of the year, rookies of the month. I think if you bring them up now, you're already really out of the NL Central, 12 and a half games back. You're not looking to make that big push towards the top of the league this year. So just sit back, wait, play this year out. Realistically, shoot under 100 losses like you did a year back. But not only that, the Cubs are on the right track, like you mentioned, bringing in the prospects and dealing out guys as well. So they're very open to trades, free agency, and spending money. I just think you leave the guys down in AAA, let them continue to work for Iowa. And like we said, Chris Bryant leads to AAA in just about everything, batting average, home runs, RBIs. So I think they'll leave those guys down there another year, bring them up, look for them to contend for Rookie of the Year and a couple other things.
Yeah, the Cubs are definitely on the rise, but one team, we just can't talk about the Cubs here on the Press Box. We like to talk about all sports and all teams with a little emphasis on the north side of Chicago. But, the St. Louis Cardinals are sitting 4 games back in the division behind the Brewers, the Brewers are really a surprise team that have got some great pitching. But the Cardinals still haven't got the offense I think they expected at the beginning of the year. But you lose a guy like Carlos Beltran to the Yankees, that was a big part of their lineup last year. You got Alan Craig, who's not hitting. You've got some pieces I just think aren't fitting quite yet, and their pitching staff hasn't stayed healthy. What are the Cardinals going to have to do, Matt, to really contend and win the division?
Well, you just said it, their pitching staff. One of the things for the Cardinals has always been their pitching staff throughout the years. That they have always been dominant or needed some help, and I think that's one of the things they will shoot for before this trade deadline. You and I have spoken about maybe bringing in David Price and a couple other prospects. They have everything filled out, and not only that, maybe their big move at shortstop, they're looking to bring in Troy Tulowitzki from the Rockies. So we'll just have to wait and see either David Price, Troy Tulowitzki, or maybe even grabbing a couple prospects.
It will be interesting to see Tulowitzki, and I've read so many rumors about he could go somewhere, could not. He's not going to win in Colorado, and he's a type of player who's having an MVP caliber season that could really come in and establish himself in a place like St. Louis. St. Louis is a great baseball city, and Tulo would really be loved by the fans there and could really made, even though he is a superstar now, an even bigger superstar in St. Louis. So for them to do that trade, though, they're going to have to give up some major prospects, probably some of their pitching, and possibly even Oscar Taveras, who is, probably one of the top 10 to 15 prospects in all of baseball, just because a good, solid young bat is hard to find.
Exactly. Troy Tulowitzki right now, just before the All-Star break, hitting in the 330s, 18 home runs, selected as the NL captain of the Home Run Derby. So not only does he have the bats going, he also can play a very solid shortstop for the Cardinals. So maybe they bring him in from Colorado and ship out a couple other guys. We'll just have to wait and see.
Trade deadline 3 weeks away. We're going to take a quick break, come back, and we're going to talk some NFL because it's right around the corner, Matt. We'll be back right here. This is Keith Gibson here on the Press Box. Back here on the Press Box, Keith Gibson alongside Matthew Gokin as we bring you the opening and premiere edition of the Press Box, the podcast. We hope you are enjoying the show thus far. Matthew, let's talk a little NFL because it'll be right around the corner. Training camp getting ready to start. We've got the Colts here close to us. We've got the Bears who should contend as well this year. Made some big moves, so it will be very interesting to see what happens this year in the NFL.
Exactly. Once again, thank you, Keith, for having me on the Press Box. But we always talk about midsummer right now. There's kind of a dead in sports. Wimbledon gets over about another month before the British Open, so things really kind of calm down, I guess you could say. And with the MLB All-Star break coming up next week, some stories have died down. You're just looking for stories, looking for things to bring up. But the NFL, one of the things you can always talk about that year around, and like you mentioned, just around the corner, the Colts winning the division the last 2 years under Andrew Luck, a phenomenal quarterback, probably a future Hall of Famer for sure. The Bears in the Central also competing this year, but a lot of moves this offseason for both teams.
Yeah, Andrew Luck established himself as everybody said, will he be the predecessor of Peyton Manning? Will he be as good? And he has proved to everybody that he is a winner. And it was a great job by the Indianapolis Colts to bring him in via the draft, and he's really shown that he is a solid quarterback who's not afraid to get dirty every once in a while either.
Exactly, and we kind of always talk about, for the central teams that don't have the big market like New York and L.A., they can afford to let go of superstars. Talking about the Cardinals last segment, they had to let go of Pujols. The Colts, they did what they have to do. They let go of Peyton Manning, then they brought in Andrew Luck, the next guy in. So for the Colts, I think that's the best move. Unfortunately, I heard a lot of Colts fans, I heard a lot of Cardinals fans when they let go of Pujols. But now, once you take a step back and look, that's a good move by both teams. So looking at Andrew Luck for the AFC South, really he's going to be the standout athlete. And a comment coming out today from Jadeveon Clowney, his one goal this year was to sack Andrew Luck, so I'm sure he heard about that as well.
Without a doubt, Jadeveon Clowney, the top draft pick in this year's draft, and a very special athlete when healthy, and that's one of my biggest concerns. But Andrew Luck and the Indianapolis Colts should vie for another division title this year without a doubt, and it should be fun to watch them. Now we go to the Bears, who let go of a longtime All-Pro in defensive end Julius Peppers, who goes and signs with the Green Bay Packers, and then they sign a defensive end in their own,
Jared Allen.
And Jared Allen, that's right. So Jared Allen comes from Minnesota. So it's kind of a circle of defensive ends in the NFC North, but Jared Allen, I think, is much better than Julius Peppers. I'll say it, he's younger, he's more athletic, he's going to go get the ball. But the Bears still have a defensive backfield nightmare, and Chris Conte is not the answer. They signed Adrian Wilson. He's coming off ACL surgery. I don't think that's the answer there either. They've got to have some help in the safety position if they're going to contend this year, because the offense, as we've seen when Jay Cutler's healthy, even when he wasn't, is there because they have the weapons.
Exactly, and going back to the defensive end swap, everyone was kind of upset that they let go of Peppers. He goes to the Green Bay Packers, which I think is a horrible pickup. He is a good defensive end, but he's older. I just don't think he'll get the job done up there. But then the Bears bring in Jared Allen, huge steal for them. And then the Minnesota Vikings, well, they pick up an offensive tackle to stop all the pass rush. So just kind of funny how all those things worked out. But here's the one thing it comes down to in the NFL. You can have a great defense anymore, and I've said this for years now. If you don't have a good quarterback, you don't have a good NFL team. Simple as that. Well, what about the Seattle Seahawks? Well, Russell Wilson didn't throw 2 interceptions all year except for one game. And that was against the 49ers, and that interception came in overtime. So there's, your little discrepancy in there. But for the NFL, you have to have a good quarterback. And just this rule of thumb I use, look at the top 5 draft picks. You had the Texans, no quarterback. The Jacksonville Jaguars, no quarterback. And the list goes on and on. Oakland, no quarterback. The last 5 picks in New England, San Francisco, Seattle, they all have quarterbacks. Tom Brady in New England, they all have quarterbacks. So you take a look, you have to have a good quarterback in the NFL. They just signed Jay Cutler, once again, to a huge deal. And who knows, that could be your answer, but you also play with Aaron Rodgers, who I think is one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league.
I will agree with you wholeheartedly there that even a diehard Bears fan, you can't deny Aaron Rodgers' talent. Aaron Rodgers, that NFC North has got some pretty good quarterbacks.
Matthew Stafford even.
Matthew Stafford in Detroit, Rodgers in Green Bay, Cutler in Chicago. Who's in Minnesota?
Who knows? Maybe Christian Ponder.
That's the one thing, and that's one thing that Minnesota has lacked is really a star quarterback. Now, they have Adrian Peterson. Don't be wrong, but I'm not sure AP is the best running back in the league anymore either.
For years, I always thought he was probably the best running back in the league as far as all-purpose. Out of the backfield, Matt Forte is excellent. So you go back and forth. Marshawn Lynch is a good running back. How good is he out of the backfield, though? So it goes in and out, but, we'll just have to wait and see. It's not all about the running backs, receivers. I think it's mostly about the quarterback. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have an excellent Hall of Fame quarterback, you have to have some defense there, of course. So you have to stop the bleeding somewhere, but Adrian Peterson, he's getting a little bit older. I will say that he has picked up, as far as running ability, he protects the ball a lot more. He doesn't fumble as much. And what was he, 7 yards short of the all-time record?
Yeah, no, he's a great running back, don't get me wrong. And I'm saying that's what I'm not trying to say is that he's not good. He is great. He's on the top 5 running backs in the NFL. But when you don't have anything else around him, teams are going to key on him, and that's not where your offense ends. But you're exactly right, Matthew, in the fact that defense does win championships, and that's why the Bears worry me. You look at last year against Green Bay in Week 17, safeties were horrible. They let the Packers score on a late play. They win. They're out of playoff contention, and that really hurts. And so, that's something the Bears have to look at, but, it's getting around that time. We're just a few weeks away. We're going to come back and talk a little bit of Illini football, which is going to come up real shortly, and a little projections from my friend Matthew Gokin. This is the Press Box. You're listening to Keith Gibson here on the Premier Edition. Back here on the Press Box, Keith Gibson alongside Matthew Gokin, our premier podcast. We thank you for joining us and tuning in this evening. And tell your friends, tell everybody you know, hey, listen to these two guys. They're pretty good-looking guys, know what they're talking about, and so tell them to tune into the Press Box, either via Facebook or YouTube. You can check us out there, and or just have them give us a holler, and we'll make sure they can find a way to listen to us. When we come back, talking Illini football, and Matthew Gokin is joining me here on the Premier Edition. Not a very good year for the Illini football last year, and this year doesn't look much better.
Exactly, and Keith, we're good looking because we're on the radio. No one can see our faces. But
that's exactly right.
Going back to the opening start of last year's football season, when you are in a battle with Southern Illinois, and it comes down to one last play for Southern Illinois, it's kind of rough for the Illinois football season. But not only that, they bring in West Lund. You talked about the quarterback battle coming up, but for this year, it's going to be another tough season for the Illini football team. And let's just kick it off. They start with Youngstown State. They have to win this game, get the season going, get rolling. So you have to open up against Youngstown State with the win. Then Western Kentucky, I believe you also have to win that one if you want to contend. So should open up with 2 wins for the Illini.
Matthew, you've got to win, I think, all but maybe against at Washington will be the only non-conference game that will be tough. I mean, then you look at Texas State on 9/20 on September 20th. You've got to win that game as well before you go into Big Ten play. So if you can go 3-1 into Big Ten play, that's a good start. Washington's going to be tough, but then the Big Ten schedule's not easy. You're looking at Nebraska and then home against Purdue, and that should be a win too.
Exactly. You going back to non-conference. If Illinois does not open up 3-1, it's going to be rough. So you have to open up at least 3 wins, 1 loss, that loss coming to Washington. So Youngstown State, Western Kentucky, and Texas State should all be victories. But going into the Big Ten season with the shakeup of no longer playing Indiana and a couple other teams with the additions to the Big Ten Conference, opening it up at Nebraska, probably a loss on the road. Home against Purdue, that's a Big Ten win you have to get. Against Purdue, you got it last year, so that streak of continuous losses in the Big Ten certainly have to shape up. So you have to win home against Purdue, and then at Wisconsin, it's going to be
tough. That's a tough one. That's
tough.
A very tough game to win at Wisconsin. They're going to be stacked again this year. Even if they're a sub team, what they usually are, they're still good.
Exactly. So Wisconsin will be tough. Home against Minnesota will be tough as well. It's homecoming, and then you have the dreaded at Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yeah, and you look at this schedule. So your next ones, you're Purdue, at Wisconsin, homecoming Minnesota, at Ohio State. If you can get the 2 home wins and go 2-5 in that stretch, you're still sitting at what?
5 wins,
5-6 right there as you're looking towards the end of the season.
And Keith, it's going to be tough, and I'll get your prediction, but you talk about at Ohio State, home against Iowa, home against Penn State, and then at Northwestern. So, for the Big Ten and everything else, you can count them up, but going back, there's a difference between being realistic and optimistic. So I'll get your perspective on that.
Optimistically, and I appreciate that, Matthew, because I think that's a great point between being realistic and optimistic, is the fact that if you're realistic, you might go have 3 wins all year long, and that's against the non-conference opponents, and you lose to at Washington, and that may be the only wins you get. That may be the realistic. If you're optimistic, we could go 6-6 and be a bowl team. You have to have 6 wins to be bowl eligible. I think you get those 3, and you pick up 3 Big Ten wins, and you're going to be sitting pretty and in a bowl. But getting the 3 Big Ten wins is something that I don't think is realistic.
Here's the thing. I think it's going to be tough for the Big Ten, so realistic and optimistic. I hope Illinois, 4-8. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but I'm going around the numbers of 3-9 on the year for the Illinois football team.
Yep, and so as we wrap things up tonight, we want to thank you for joining us on the premier edition of the Press Box. Matthew Gokin, thank you very much for joining me right here.
Thank you for having me.
Opening podcast, the premier edition. As we wrap it up, we've talked a little baseball, we've talked a little football, and we've talked Illini football. We'll have more next week, so make sure you like us on Facebook. Let me know on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Keith_Gibson13. You can follow me on Facebook as well, and let me know. Give me your comments on the podcast. Let me know what you thought about it and what you'd like to hear us talk about. That's what it's here for. It's for you, our listeners. So we thank you for joining the Press Box this week. For Keith Gibson and Matthew Gokin, good night, everybody.